Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and welcome to the show. My guest this week is Sarah Gadon, an actor and director who's played key roles in Amma Asante's Belle, David Cronenberg's A Dangerous Method, Cosmopolis, and Maps to the Stars, and Denis Villeneuve's Enemy. You might also have seen her in A Royal Night Out, Dracula Untold, or even The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Seriously, she's everywhere. This winter, Sarah co-stars with James Franco in the new miniseries 11/22/63, launching in the US on Hulu this Monday, February 15th, and in Canada on Super Channel Wednesday, February 17th. Her latest film is James Shammas' Indignation, which bowed at Sundance last month and makes its international premiere this week at the Berlin Film Festival. Sarah chose Cléo from 5 to 7, Agnès Varda's breakthrough 1962 drama starring Corinne Marchand as a young singer who spends an afternoon in Paris awaiting the results of a biopsy. A cinema verite character study, it contains a universe of feeling within its deceptively simple premise, and it also creates one of the most fully realized female characters to that point, and it does so casually that you might not even notice until your second or third viewing. But you will notice. Sarah certainly has. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Do people ever have notes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I have notes.
Of course you do.
I have some notes.
No.
I just jotted them down because... Well, I'll tell you why later. But I'll tell you why later.
What I find is that people get so caught up in the expectations that they have for themselves. It's nothing for me. The point of the show is to just let people tell the audience, the imaginary, whoever's out there audience, about the thing that they love. And so I do very little. I just feel the movie back. I'm not going to test you.
But you have seen it.
I have. I just watched it again Sunday night.
I noticed that you have the box set too.
I actually...
I'm really proud of you for having the box set.
This is my embarrassing failure of nerve story. I took that box set with me to a breakfast interview with Agnès Varda.
Oh my God.
And I didn't pull it out because I didn't want to fanboy.
Right.
But for God's sake.
I know.
It was really great. It was when she was here with Beaches of Agnes, so 2008, I guess. And it was during the film festival, and it was her and me and 3 younger women journalists, all in their 20s, who clearly knew who she was and were terrified of her.
Right.
And she was so warm and so... Have you had the chance to meet her?
I have.
Isn't she fantastic?
She's amazing.
And I'm the same way.
I met her in LA. I was there for work, and I think it's called the Arrows Theater in Santa Monica.
Oh yeah.
It's a tiny little art house cinema.
Jessica Chastain told me once that was her education. I'm dropping names.
Yeah, it's really...
She went there with her friends when she was...
It's a great theater, and I was there, and I saw that there was going to be an Agnès Varda double bill of Cléo from 5 to 7 and Vagabond, and then she would be there for the Q&A afterwards, and I went, and I took a friend of mine who didn't know who Agnès Varda was, and I just gushed so hard, and all throughout the Q&A everyone was asking questions, and I was sitting there thinking, that's such a dumb question. If anyone knows her work, they would never have asked that question. But she was so humble and gracious and incredible. And then afterwards I went up to her, and I totally fangirled. I couldn't say anything. I was so in awe of her, and I just kind of shook her hand and said what an honor it was to meet her. And
yeah, I think, like, you want to say that she's I honestly don't think she thinks she occupies the space in cinema that she does. And at the same time, she must be aware of it because of the films that she's now making, which sort of trade on it and play on it. But I think that's how this works, right? Like, you create something that goes out into the world and is immediately larger than you. And then you can never fully live up to the impression of yourself that people have. So some people try, and you get Shatner.
Yeah.
And then there are people who, like Varda, is just like, you know what? Thank you so much. I'm working on something new. Would you like to hear about that?
Yeah.
And we taught this thing for the journalists, for the 3 young women and myself, and a woman who was shadowing me for Now That Day.
Oh, wow.
And she knew who she was, and she was just like, oh my God, this is the first thing we do today? Like, yeah. But she gave us an hour. Like, she just wouldn't stop.
But to me, I think that's kind of what a true artist is. I think that now filmmakers create their own persona and kind of use that to create a separation between the audience and or the critics or whatever and their work. But to me, she's just a true artist. She transcends any labels, any boxes, any branding, anything, and is just kind of this, amazing open creator who's just been creating for her pretty much her entire life.
Yeah, and she follows that impulse wherever it will take her. So coming back to Cléo now after, 50 years of her work, it was really remarkable because it's so much more straight in terms of its... it has to be because it's chronologically structured.
Right.
But it's also much more...
It's a linear narrative.
Yeah, and focused, like intensely focused. Even the diversions are only for 30 seconds instead of 3 or 4 minutes, which is what she does now. And I love the diversions that she has. And in Cléo, it's looking at people or observing just that little shot of the kittens playing behind her that goes on a bit too long because the kittens are adorable. And why would you cut away?
Yeah.
But that impulse is always there. It's just so much more controlled, and I assume it's simply because of budgetary restrictions and time. Right. She talks about that in the stuff on the Criterion disc, on the supplements. Yeah. That they only had this much of everything. Right. But what I feel from it is that she's making the absolute most of everything in every second.
Well, time is a really interesting component in the film because it's set in real time. It takes place over an hour and a half. And really Cléo, the pop singer at the center of the entire film, is faced with, at the beginning of the film, her own mortality. Yeah. Or immortality, really. And so she's waiting for these test results, and so you have the ticking clock right off the top of the film while she's having the appointment with the tarot card reader. Yeah. And then, so time is really like the focus of the film, is that you have this, the linear narrative, the real, everything in real time, and then you have this idea of a romanticized time of life. And so it's kind of, she's playing those two things off of each other, which is another reason why I really love the film.
Yeah. So the key question, what was your first exposure? When did you first see it?
Yeah, so I saw this film. I started my degree at Queen's University, and I was in Film 101. I was 18, and this was one of the first films that we watched. And it really just cracked my head open. I remember because I've been acting for a long time, and I dabbled in acting growing up as a child actor, and when I finished high school, I said to my parents, I think I'll go to LA, and my parents looked at me and said, no, you're not going to be doing that. You can go to school, and we highly recommend you take a full year off of acting and study whatever you want to study, wherever you want to study it. And so I went to Queen's. I took a full year off acting, and I decided to major in film and theater. And so I was in this film class, and it was the first film that I think I ever really saw that was outside of patriarchal cinema. Okay. And it blew me away because I'd never seen female subjectivity criticized in such a way, and then also indulged in such a way, and then also promoted in such a way. And I, and also there's the kind of secondary element of, as a performer, as a woman kind of coming of age and leaving, younger kind of roles and entering adulthood, at the height of the manic pixie dream girl in cinema. Sure. What did it mean to me to be a performer and to be an object in film, which I loved? And so all of those questions kind of just mind was blown, and it really just changed my whole perspective about cinema, filmmaking, performing, critical thinking, film theory, all those things. And I fell in love with Agnès Varda, and then became a big fan of Agnès Varda and watched all of her films, and so it started also a passionate love for one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, and then it also made me become very self-critical about my work and what I wanted my work to be like. So that was 18. Right. I'm 28 now, so 10 years later. And I've revisited this film a lot in the past 10 years, and so when you asked me what film would you like to promote, I felt like I had to say Cléo from 5 to 7 because it affected me so deeply. But then watching it now as 10 years later, it was interesting to see how different I found it.
Yeah.
And how much more critical I was of the character at the heart of the film, Cléo. And how much I despised her watching it now in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so it was a real kind of interesting exercise for me to watch this film again.
Okay. I mean, for me, like, I get that with The Rules of the Game. That's the one that John Harkness nailed perfectly. Said, come back to it every 5 years, no matter what else you're doing in your life, you'll find yourself empathizing with a different person. That was his perfect example of subjectivity in cinema, because the film is set in stone. It hasn't changed. Maybe there'll be a restoration here or there, but everyone has his reasons. You just learn what that means every time you come back to the film. It means, oh, that's right, this person also. It's like a prism. Cléo, by focusing on a single character, really makes you re-examine why you're responding in a certain way, which is this really interesting answer to what Renoir was doing, I think. That's really interesting. I find myself this watch through, I found myself much more interested in milieu, because of the handheld, the documentary feel of it, that it's happening. And I thought, like, is this what French neorealism could have been? Like, if she'd run with this instead of going in the other direction, and becoming more of an artful narrative filmmaker. I guess self-consciously artful, I suppose, but that sounds negative. It's not what she did. But if she'd gone with this approach, would it have spawned a different movement? Would it have changed everything? Because it's really unlike anything else, and of a piece with everything else that she's done. It's a really
right.
weird
Yeah, it's definitely a standalone piece, and it probably, I think it was the most commercially successful film that she did too.
Yeah,
so
probably not surprising, right?
Yeah, but I also was really interested in talking about it too, because recently I've just been reading so much about the millennial generation and Generation Z, and being a millennial, and thinking back on my own initial response to this film, and thinking about there's just so much dialogue right now about the inherent narcissism of my generation.
Sure.
And watching this film again, and thinking of the way that it's shot in relation to shows that informed and shape women of my generation, like Sex and the City, for example, which is essentially the same conversation of a portrait of a woman set against, a city, a major metropolis. And then also, in light of all of the kind of media hysteria, about the Kardashians, and about how much they've repopularized the female as object, and how they've taken pride in creating this voyeurism between their audience and themselves as an object of desire.
Yeah, I feel like they're also selling vapidity, which really bothers me.
What's vapidity?
Emptiness.
Oh, yes,
That there is nothing to.
Well, that's the thing, is that a lot of the times when you hear people talk about the Kardashians, people say, "What are they even famous for? They don't do anything." But really, they've pinpointed everything that we love about voyeurism and scopophilia, and that's looking at something that we desire, and they epitomize that. And I think that notion is also in direct dialogue with this film, because Cléo is very self-aware of herself as an object of desire, and she's constantly looking at herself in the mirror. She's constantly, walking through the city, feeling people's gaze. And it's all about the gaze, this film, until halfway through the film, when she gives this performance and she sings this song, and she starts singing it. It's called Without You. And she starts singing it, and she's reading the lyrics. And then she looks up directly into the camera, returns the gaze, acknowledges the audience. And from that moment on, the film becomes not so much about her being looked at, but her doing the looking.
Yeah, very
and
much
so that is like, what a great, moment in cinema, and what a great moment for the female as the object. So I think all of those things are really relevant today, especially with pop culture and performance.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised no one's tried to remake it. Even, you know, just...
Oh, but people have. So Madonna tried to get the rights to it.
Sure. No, I mean, no one's ripped it off.
Yes,
That we haven't seen 10 of them this year because theoretically it should be possible.
I think it's because she owns all of the rights to her films and is still alive.
Yes.
So I think that there's that. But just going back to what you were saying earlier about her, you know, making these works of art, making these films and then releasing them, and they kind of take on this other life force. And people of all different generations keep discovering her work and keep, you know, promoting her work. I think it's even more relevant that she kind of was the first woman to really self-finance a lot of her films and create her own production company. And then to kind of put yourself on the line for your work and then have it still be discovered and still be popular is also this incredible feat as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, there were women who worked within the studio systems in the U.S., like Ida Lupino, but it wasn't the same kind of, I mean, it was not taking everything and making it yours.
Yeah.
And she, especially coming out of the French New Wave, which was so defined and so thoroughly defined by 3 or 4 filmmakers who had specific, intimidating artistic points of view. I mean, Truffaut was an entertainer, but he was still an incredible artist. Godard, less focused on entertainment, more focused on cinematic reinvention. But again, you know, the more time you spend in the French New Wave, it's amazing that anyone else tried something after those two. And then to have Varda be sort of on the periphery and then just push her way through and make a film that is at least as worthy of standing alongside them and then continue her career it's remarkable. And I would think that France was not necessarily so conducive to female accomplishment at the time. I mean, it was post-war. They were all still pretty focused on, I mean, the masculine culture that Godard is espousing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not invented. That was there.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that always really spoke to me artistically was that she really believed that, you know, she really believed in the semiotics of cinema. She really believed that cinema was a language. But she also believed in authorship and was a true auteur. And she also believed in gender. She said that she does think that, you know, cinema is gendered. If I'm going to tell you a story from my perspective, that will be from a gendered lens. And it's refreshing, I think, at a time where a lot of female filmmakers are kind of in the midst of this feminist backlash where they don't want to be labeled female filmmakers. They don't want their work labeled feminist. They just want it. They want to kind of transcend those labels, which I can understand. You know, one part of me understands, but the other part of me is, you know, also thinks, so how can you not acknowledge gender when you're talking about perspective, and certainly in this film when you're talking about identity and how identities are constructed and how the female identity is constructed, because in cinema identity and gender is a highly constructed thing, and it's something that, you know, that's the reason why we love to watch cinema. So I love that she kind of owns that in such a strong way too, because it's refreshing. Yeah,
and we can understand, I mean, the film lets us understand that Cléo's first crisis is a performance that she is playing. Someone even says, or her assistant says right away, you know, like, you're so dramatic all the time, you play into this. But she is inhabiting a role that she thinks she's supposed to play, and it isn't until the song and the change of clothes that she starts doing anything that feels like an honest response to her own feelings. She's letting the tarot reader tell her how to feel. She's letting her friend tell her how to feel. She accepts the free coffee you know, on the house because someone is trying to hit on her, but also because it's a free coffee, and why wouldn't you if you're feeling badly?
But I would argue that she knows she's gonna get the free coffee, and that's why she does the sniveling, and that's why she kind of plays them.
So it is all performance.
I think it is. I really do. I think it is. And another thing that I noticed kind of rewatching this film was in the mise-en-scene you often see references to marriage, like when she's in the hat shop. I'd never noticed the bridal mannequin in the background, and I thought, oh, that's so genius. And then also this kind of how children play this almost foreboding, like very kind of eerie role in the film as well, when she sings the song in her apartment, and then she leaves her apartment and there's that small toddler outside playing this really creepy little piano, and it's just like, it's so good. It's like really just kind of rejects any kind of maternal instincts that, you know, strong female leads traditionally are supposed to have. And that's what another reason why I love that film is because as vapid and empty as Cléo can be in the beginning, she really dodges any kind of female archetype by, you know, subverting all of those things in one way or another by the end of the film. And that's another thing that's kind of genius about the movie, is that she starts off really vapid and empty, and then and at the end is you know, much more self-aware.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense, I mean, it isn't until she's paired with someone who doesn't know who she is and has no expectations of her that we even have the first glimpse of who she wants to be. Like it's not in terms of questions of identity, I think Cléo knows who she is throughout, but she won't show it to people. And it isn't until the last half hour of the film, really, that we start to see that door open. And it's because maybe she's finally aware that she's about to not be. Like the mortality thing, this really surprised me, actually. You mentioned the fortune teller, but I had forgotten, watching the film again, that that Varda is so careful about revealing that information. It takes a long time before we even know where the problem is. I think it was, I remember thinking, it's like, oh, yeah, she says it's in my belly, but it's a good 45 minutes in. I was really surprised by that.
Yeah.
That if you had wandered into this film in 1962, you wouldn't necessarily know why she's at the... I mean, now we know, because it's the defining concept of the film.
Right.
But to walk in cold and not know that it's about a woman who might be dying, or who thinks she is, for the entire film.
But that's the way that Varda engages with the audience and kind of makes you self-critical, is because you don't have to care about that, because she's this pretty object that we're all kind of, you know, experiencing this weird voyeurism as she walks through the city, and she's like super tall and extremely beautiful and wearing this really weird wig, and
I always forget about the wig until she takes it off, and it's just like, oh, that's right. And so and that's kind of the trick that she plays on you, is you're like, why am I empathizing with this woman? And I think, am I being superficial because I'm empathizing with this woman? She hasn't really earned anything from us, but we just do. And then she kind of flips that on its head later in the film. Yeah, and her, I mean, I think on some level we're that's what narrative does, right? It tells you you're going to follow this person whether you like her or not. Yeah, her name is in the title. There's no question that this is the person the film will be following. Yeah. So of course we're strapped in with her. But yeah, she, in the end, is deserving of our empathy, but it takes us a while. It takes the movie a while to teach us that. And that's, so you said you were more frustrated with her this time, or angry at her this time. So what was it specifically? I was just
highly critical of her in the beginning because of how vapid she is. I guess I had forgotten how, you know, when she looks in the mirror and she says things like, ugliness is a kind of death, and you still have your beauty, little butterfly, and just those things you kind of think like, that is so, you know, that's so ridiculous. Those kinds of things are so ridiculous to think, and she's just so vapid. And when she's in the hat shop kind of trying on all the hats, and you just think, oh, this is so disgusting. Who is she, you know? And then of course, what I really liked watching it again is the reminder of how the female as performer can recreate her identity again and again and again and again and again. And I love that play throughout the entire film. And you see it not only with Cléo, but you see it with her friend who's posing nude for the artists. I love the scene when she walks into the artist's studio and you see the female body sculpted in all these different forms from all these different perspectives.
Yeah, there's that geometric thing in one corner.
Yeah, and she's just kind of walking through, and the camera's kind of over her shoulder, following her through this basically these man-made constructions of woman, and then you see her friend who's there naked as the model, and then as the class quickly ends, she jumps off, puts her dress on, and then they have this great little discussion about the female body. Mm-hmm. And when Cleo says, "How can you do that? Aren't you ashamed?" And she said, "Oh, well, they're not looking at, they're not looking about whether or not it's right or wrong. They're looking at form."
Yeah, doesn't she say like I cease to exist at one point, or that she just becomes an idealization?
Yeah, and that's such that little kind of conversation that they have as they're leaving the art studio is so loaded and is so pregnant with ideas of identity and female identity and how it's constructed, and how I was thinking about it too, and she was singing the song again in that middle point in the film. Mm-hmm. and the song is Without You, and I was watching it again, and I was listening to I was looking at the English translation of the lyrics, and it was just, I thought for the first time, oh wow, and maybe I was just really in my own like spiral of how much I love this movie, but I was like, oh yeah, she's singing to the audience about the male gaze. She's talking about losing the gaze and losing herself, and herself ceasing to exist without it. As a performer.
Certainly possible.
And I was like, oh, love Agnès Varda so much.
My take on it is that now I was trying to figure out how familiar, because they dropped the phrase chemotherapy in the film.
Yeah.
That surprises me every time. It's just, they had that in it? Like that level of understanding of cancer treatment.
And how kind of laissez-faire the doctor is. It's like, you do a little chemo and then you're going to be out of there. It's
spoilers, but you've seen this movie by now, probably, if you're listening.
Hopefully you've already pre-ordered the Agnès Varda box set on Criterion.
I'm hoping for the Blu-ray, guys. Get on that. But yeah, there is that matter-of-factness to it, which is great, because, again, it just deflates all the tension that we've been experiencing, but it also feels weird and patriarchal and dismissive, right? Because we've been with her and we're just as worried as she is, and for having him say, "Oh, 2 months, silly girl, you'll be fine." Really, that's what that would have been. Like that whole Mad Men approach to relating to women on a professional level. That's really weird. But it also, this time around, it recolors my experience of the hat stores, because she's looking at hats because she's thinking she's going to lose her hair. Is she how much do they know? How much foreshadowing is here? Mm-hmm. Is that what disappearing means? Is that what ugliness means? I mean, is she worried about that? Is she not afraid of death, but of not looking perfect?
Yeah.
Because so much of her is invested in this.
Yeah.
And you would the first, I don't know, 3 times I've seen that film, I had never even thought about it. But it's there. Yeah. I think. Mm-hmm. I think it's intentional. It must be, because Varda's too smart not to.
Absolutely. But I think also the idea that she's gone on this kind of catharsis and has in a way reconciled the idea that she is not immortal, and she says that even with the song, with the composers. How long does a song last? How long does it last? That idea of wanting to be immortal. She's eventually reconciled by the time the doctor tells her about her illness and the chemotherapy. I think that's another reason why it's not as prominent, because she could have chosen to also make more out of it as a filmmaker. She could have chosen to put score underneath it, or she could have chosen to shoot it a different way, but she doesn't. And so you're right, I think it's really intentional.
Yeah, it's such a great film to unpack, just generally speaking. And I'm just glancing every time I turn my head, I see the Varda box, the 4x Varda box. It's just like there's so much other stuff she had to do and was going to do.
Yeah.
It's but we haven't even mentioned the name of the actor who plays Cleo, because the character is so thoroughly defined by the movie, I think, as a human person, as an individual. But Corinne Marchand is just amazing, and I was really surprised. She mostly did television after this.
Well, she was a singer. She actually
wasn't primarily acting.
A singer, more so than an actor.
Okay.
And that's something that kind of makes although the film does stand outside of Varda's other work, it still has the documentary approach in the sense that it's shot in real time, mm-hmm. the use of pop singer instead of, an actress. Like those kinds of devices are all very much present in all of her work too.
Yeah, it really is something. I just keep coming back to how dazzling it is, even now, like having watched it. I think this is my 5th time seeing it straight through, and I've seen pieces of it over and over again. But it is just such a, like, it's just so rich, and I saw The Walk last night, the Zemeckis film.
Oh, yeah.
And its opening sequences in Paris, I'm pretty sure, are recreated from the same locations, because that's Paris to him. Like, it's probably not where Philippe Petit really practiced his high wire act and annoyed people, which is what we see in the film. But it's like, oh yeah, that tobacco store is, I know that sign. That's the recreation. And it was set in 1970, I think it opens in 72 or 73, so it would have been 10 years after. But he's very clearly recreating that in, I think it must have been Montreal, because the whole thing was shot there. But that, like, either that part of Paris is so incredibly iconic in his mind, or that is the Paris that we all know because of this movie and 5 or 6 others that happened at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's what I love about... that's why I think I despise the opening of the film and the beginning of the film so much, is because Varda does this thing where she says, oh, this is your nostalgic idea of Paris. This is the left bank. This is, very cool, very artsy, very, there's just so much to want to look at. And then she gives you this beautiful woman in the heart of Paris, and it's everything that you think that Paris is going to be. And then she says, now, see how beautiful this is? Well, look at how ugly it is. Look at how superficial and gross your nostalgia is for this city and this kind of woman is. And that's what I feel like I was experiencing in the beginning of the film, is because you watch it and you think, oh, Paris, I love Paris. Paris is so beautiful. And then, oh, look at, I love, she's so beautiful. She's so chic. Look at her. And then she opens her mouth and you just go, gross. And I think that is also what's kind of what I was talking about earlier, with the whole kind of connection to this obsession with reality television and obsession with, the selfie, or like Kim Kardashian and the culture and everything they represent, is that it's so visually conscious and cultivated, but completely empty at its core. And that's also another real kind of arc that connects the two of them.
Yeah. I wonder if that's why nobody's tried to knock it off, because now you would have her friends be obsessed with whatever else was in their lives. They'd be too busy to even listen to her. She's very much the center of the world for the characters that she interacts with. And even, like, accidentally, because Varda was shooting her with a camera without, clearly with a small crew just following her around. But there are scenes where when she's on the bus, or when she's just walking, heads are turning to follow, and they're looking at the camera. Clearly, they're looking at what's going on, because they look straight into the lens. But it makes you think, oh, they're following her. And it's brilliant. Like, it's a great device, because it instantly shows us just how much attention is being paid to her.
Well, I was thinking a lot about contemporary films and female subjectivity, and thinking, what is a film that could kind of be related to this that I've seen that's made. And I think it's so interesting to be talking about a film like this kind of after the summer blockbusters, which are super
phallocentric. You can say it.
Yeah, okay, phallocentric.
Sure.
And it feels so refreshing to watch a film like this. And then I was thinking about Diary of a Teenage Girl, which I don't know if you've seen yet.
I have,
but
and you've just finished. You made a Real Night Out with the Star, right?
Yeah, with Belle Powley, who's phenomenal in this film. And I was thinking, like, that's a recent example of a film that's completely told from female subjectivity. And it was interesting because it was at Sundance this year, and I saw Belle, and we were talking about her press for the film, and she was saying, like, oh yeah, it's really interesting because some critics think that it's this like nostalgic look at female sexuality, and it like romanticizes it in some way. And that was some of the feedback that she got. But I think Cléo falls under the same criticisms, and so at least the beginning is that we're so seduced by Paris, by this woman, by the aesthetic, by the kind of poppy early 60s music and production design and all that, and then there's such depth though underneath it that really supports everything aesthetic that's happening. And I think the same is true of Diary of a Teenage Girl.
Yeah, oh my god, I would never think of it that way.
Yeah.
That's just not how I'd frame that film at all. I was amazed at the the fact that there is almost nothing happening for so much of that film, that it's just allowing itself to be internal, and that there's still tension, that you're in it with her, and you get to spend... I mean, there are so many movies that don't understand that it is possible to show a character making a mistake and let the audience know that the movie is aware of what's happening, but doesn't side with it necessarily. And just to be ambiguous or ambivalent, that's a power. And absolutely that's what happens in this movie. I did not get, nostalgia. No, it's horrible.
I also think that there's a reason why this film hasn't been made again, and it's because I think that there's a real kind of dichotomy between, in a film, the woman is either the object, or it's told from her perspective. Right. And I think that it's very difficult to reconcile those two, which I think Varda is trying to do in the film, and that's the whole, brilliance behind the film, is that it reconciles and acknowledges that the woman is object, but she can transcend that. And I think that is kind of like the whole point about mainstream filmmaking, is that it doesn't ever acknowledge that the woman is an object.
Yeah, it can't.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do that, the game's over.
Yeah.
I think of two movies that sort of do it.
Okay.
And it's weird that they're both about royalty. Coppola's Marie Antoinette and Vallet's Young Victoria.
Right.
And they both allow a certain element of self-awareness, both in the cinematic presentation and in the subject themselves. Like what Blunt does early on in Young Victoria is to sort of acknowledge her power, but also as a monarch, but also refuse it in a weird way, and push back in strange ways that tell you that she knows what she's doing, even though the movie is pushing her into these confrontations, because that's what happened historically. There's much more of a sense of an intelligence behind the scenes. And with Marie Antoinette, I think it's the music that does it, but it creates just enough of a disconnect that Dunst is able to kind of show us how, because that version of Marie Antoinette was sort of presented as a sheltered child who really had no idea what she was getting into, and then gradually becomes aware just enough to realize that it's all going to go badly.
Right. Yeah.
But neither of them comes close to doing what Varda does, which is make the movie itself the vehicle of self-realization.
And I don't think
that was pretentious.
I don't think that you're in their... I don't think that you're in their head.
No, I don't think so either. You get flashes, but
I don't think, because I really feel like when you're following Cléo throughout the city, like you are in her, you are in her consciousness. She's speaking exactly what she's thinking at any given moment every time she looks into the mirror, and so I think that you experience her in a different way. You become her in a way when you're watching the film. You go on the journey with her, as opposed to having a real distance, I think. Yeah.
So many of these episodes keep coming back to Roger Ebert's line about the empathy machine, that that's what cinema is. And I think that's why people pick the movies they pick, is because they're the ones they feel closest to.
Right.
And with Cléo too, when you're right, we're in her head. It still puzzles me. Are we supposed to find the short overly precious, the little silent film that she watches?
Right.
Because I think by that point in the movie, I have no patience for it.
Really?
It goes on and on and on. I get it. I think I understand what they're trying to do, but I'm trying to figure out if it's because Cléo is starting to count the minutes and is starting to, like, if it's starting to weigh on her, is that why I'm sitting there going, Jesus, this won't end?
Jesus, this won't end. I mean,
how to play with an audience? I've never seen it with a full house, like in film school. How did that part of it go?
I mean, I think it played really well. I don't know if there was a lot of... Yeah, I think it did play really well.
Okay.
That little short within the film, Godard is the guy in the film.
Yeah. In terms of its historical significance, it's hugely valuable.
Yeah. I just think it's so... when I was watching it, I thought it was so interesting because it's so racist.
Yeah, that too.
it's like, and here's just a sidebar of French racism.
Yeah. And is that how they thought it was in the silent era, or is it a contemporary commentary for 1962? I honestly don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it, for me, I felt like it was a commentary on silent film and the female characters in silent film. Mm-hmm. Because it's pretty much exactly how most silent movies go. Yeah. And most silent films are incredibly sexist and
colonialist, racist.
Yeah.
That's the era, right? That's the popular entertainment.
Yeah, but I don't know. I didn't find that it was very long when I was watching it.
No, it was interminable this time.
Yeah.
I was really like, this is 6 minutes? This is still going?
I didn't realize it was 6 minutes.
I think it feels...
But I love the whole kind of concept of the two of them delivering the film to the theater.
Sure. Yeah.
And then watching it, and her kind of leaving right after that and going on this...
walkabout, basically.
Yeah. I know. I don't know. Maybe I didn't pay more attention to that.
Oh, you don't need to. But it's one of those things that I get it too as a bridge into a little slapstick, a little silliness, as a bridge into the much more serious movement in the final act of the film. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those things that now it baffles me. It's like the musical interlude in Butch Cassidy.
Okay.
Where you just sit there and go, oh, this played in 1969 and now I want to murder everybody. Raindrops keep falling on my head, or the living strings, or whatever those ba-da-da-da-da music numbers are.
Yeah.
You want to throttle the movie for thinking it's cool.
Yeah, but those devices chiefly... Okay, so let's explore this. Those devices chiefly existed so that you could... for voyeurism.
Right.
So that you could take in the female character. It's like the idea of a woman singing in the film, the female performance of the film, which is... It's like every time Zooey Deschanel sings, it's like the narrative stops,
yep,
and you take in the object. And so I wonder if the short film is less about taking in the object of the woman and taking in the object of the film and pointing to the own artifice of the film itself, which it does, because it's very self-conscious, especially in the very beginning when she's walking down the stairs from the tarot card, and and you see the 3 cuts of her walking down. It's the same shot repeated 3 times, and or whether or not it's looking back into the camera, or whether it's at the end of the credits when it goes from black and white into color. Like, those things I feel like are devices that she uses to point to the artifice of cinema, which is probably what she's doing in that short.
I think so. Well,
maybe not short enough interlude.
Yeah. We could do with less.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly the French New Wave is about, if you want to criticize a film, make a film. So this is clearly her Varda interacting with it.
Yeah.
As opposed to other montagey distractions that would follow in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering now if I'm retroactively holding that against it, because it just feels like I want to see what's happening with Cléo. I need to know how she feels.
Yeah.
And that's just my
But
own
maybe
urgency.
she's subverting that kind of desire that you have as an audience member. Is she's saying, no,
yeah,
Cléo is not the spectacle anymore.
Yeah.
This is the spectacle, and instead of having her sing to you or look in the mirror or go hat shopping, I'm going to give back to you what you're seeking as an audience member.
Yeah. And of course, as a filmmaker, she is in absolute charge, right? She's going to show me whatever she wants to show me. I don't have a say.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here passively watching the film that she's made.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder if, like, every repetition of it for me that's the one thing that I'm less
You're
patience
over it.
for.
You're
I'm
over
done
it.
with it. Yeah, moving on. Maybe it's just Godard. After film socialism, it's just like, come on.
Yeah.
Let's go. The last one wasn't bad. But it's a weird place to be. I mean, anything's going to look different and play differently half a century later.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing that really stuck out to me, is like, I think if your point was to make something that felt dated, you have succeeded.
Right.
But that's my own, cut. I want to move forward. I'm just doing Fred Ward and the Player. Come on.
There is something about them standing in a cinema as like these 2 young women, and then she cuts straight to this kind of diversion.
Yeah.
I think there is something powerful about that. Whether or not you detested that, like I detested the beginning of the film,
Yeah.
It's funny what your reactions are.
Everyone has his reasons.
Yeah.
So, wrapping question, which is I will now make you do a hip hop. I still haven't found a way to lead into this. But
I think hip hop is a great way to
hip hop is a terrifying one.
Nice.
But the final question of the show is always the same, which is there anything you've borrowed or stolen or taken from Cléo in your own work?
Yeah, well, I think I directed a half-hour documentary show. I did one episode. It's called Real Side. Mm-hmm. And it was and they had approached me initially to be in an episode and to follow me, because the show is essentially artists following artists and the point of collaboration and what that means to you. And so I did it about 3 years ago.
That long? Because it only just aired.
Yeah, it just aired, but we shot it 3 years ago.
Wow.
And it was at a time where I started doing a lot of press for film, and I don't want to say unfortunately, but a major kind of component of doing press for film is in direct conjunction with fashion magazines.
Sure.
And it's like one of the main avenues for you to discuss your work as an artist is in fashion magazines. And so I was shooting a lot for fashion, and I was really struggling with the idea of cultivating your image and giving up part of your image in the name of a fashion editorial or for a fashion publication, which ultimately has its own agendas about beauty and how you should look and all those things. And,
Well, this is right around antiviral, right? Because you and I have had this conversation.
Yes.
We were talking about it at
Yeah. And I was doing a lot of shoots, and I had started doing a lot of photo shoots with Caitlin Cronenberg, who's David's daughter, who I've done 3 films with now.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's really...
She's a great photographer, and she's very collaborative. So and one specific kind of thing that she does is she has these photo projects where you create a character with her, and then she photographs you through a narrative that you decide on, like the stills, like shooting stills on a film.
Right.
And so I decided to direct this episode about how we work together and kind of the difference between shooting for a major fashion publication versus a smaller fashion publication. And I think that a lot of what I was thinking about during that time is informed by Cléo, about that whole idea of being an object and claiming your space, and how do you transcend that label, and how do you do some of the seeing, how do you control who you are as an object in a magazine. And so I think a lot of that is influenced by Cléo, and how I shot the documentary is influenced by Cléo as well.
Okay. And to the other wind-up, which I've been thinking about since you mentioned it, if you had the chance to run into Varda again now, I mean, you obviously wouldn't be starstruck.
I think I still would be, yeah.
There's a handful of people that still do that to me. Like, I've been doing this for more than half my life, interviewing people, and still there are people who I have trouble kind of building up to.
Yeah, I think now, I started my own production company a year ago. I think now I would be able to ask her more questions about actual production and kind of I would love to ask her more about her company, how she formed her company, her model for financing, those kinds of things. I would drop my fangirl and just kind of, put my business hat on and ask her questions about that. That I would be really interested to talk with her about.
And the other question I'm kind of really curious about, if somehow a remake of Cléo came together,
no, you can't touch a masterpiece.
Where would you set it? Because it couldn't be Paris anymore.
Oh, like, just man, in terms nowhere. Of, don't remake don't touch it, It's perfect. And the thing about my whole philosophy about remaking films is that you should never remake great films, because great films stand the test of time.
Sure.
Remake a bad film, make it from a different perspective, and make it a better film. That's what you should do.
Yeah,
Don't remake great films, because you watch a movie like this and it's still so relevant. It's still in direct conversation with pop culture and art and so many issues about identity, and there's no need to remake it because it's stood the test of time.
Yeah. Oh no, I completely agree. I would throw myself in front of people who were, the Ben-Hur remake we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Of course, it's inevitable. It's public domain.
Yes,
it's going to happen.
Fine.
Exodus, Gods and Kings, all of that stuff. But I would throw myself in front of the producer who tried to do Lawrence of Arabia or 2001. I would, I would do Murder to protect these films.
Me too.
And I'm kind of glad you have that same killer instinct.
Thanks.
My thanks to Sarah Gadon, whose new series 11/22/63 premieres on Hulu in the US this Monday, February 15th, and starts airing in Canada on Super Channel Wednesday, February 17th. You'll also want to keep an eye out for her new film, Indignation, opening later this year. You can find Sarah on Twitter at Sarah Gadon, all one word, SarahGadon, and you can find Cléo from 5 to 7 on DVD in a very nice special edition from the Criterion Collection, either on its own or as part of the 4 by Agnès Varda box set. Get the box set. In the US, it's also streaming on Hulu+. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-cast, or on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. And if you want to leave a review on iTunes, which would do remarkable things for our visibility, I don't know, maybe do it with an accordion playing in the background. Thanks for listening.